So, really warm welcome to this T-level transition program technical focus group. And this technical focus group is specifically for the creative and media route. So we run our technical focus groups for all of the routes. And so I think this is either number 9 or number 10 that we've done over the past couple of weeks to cover all the routes. So I'm hoping that today you're here with your creative and media hats on in terms of that being really your curriculum area. My name's Sharon Moore. Really lovely to see you all. I'm an education advisor, technical education advisor, to give me my official title, for both the Department for Education and for the Association of Colleges. I've been working on both T-levels and transition program since their inception. I've been involved in a lot of the development work on a number of routes, and that's from the very early starts of the T-levels when we were developing the outline content with panels, and also all the work we've done subsequently on the transition program. There's quite a few of you here today, so what I'm going to suggest, just while I'm doing a couple of other introductions, is that if you can, and I can see Hayley, that you've already told me that you're doing 2 things at once this morning, so thank you. If you just want to say hi in the chat, that would be fantastic. You might just want to say who you are, where you're from, what you're doing in terms of T-levels and transition program for the creative and media route. So if you want to start throwing some bits and pieces into chat, it's always really nice for people to know who else is on the call. So as well as myself with the technical education advisor role, I'm also really fortunate to have some of my AOC colleagues with me this morning. So my AOC colleagues, Paul and Lauren and Mary, are advisors on the T-level and the transition support programs that AOC runs, and they'll be working with you this morning in terms of helping me to facilitate some of the breakout groups that we're going to do. Abby's also with us. She's just hiding in the background, but Abby's here as my technical support. Abby will also be looking at registrations, etc. So we're very keen that we do know who's here and it matches our register. Most importantly, because that does mean that then the presentation will get sent to you. So just keep an eye on chat. Abby may send you an individual message if she doesn't have your email registered. So thanks very much. I can see a couple of people jotting stuff in the chat, and that's great. Thanks. Yeah, media, brilliant, Blake. Thank you. Yep. Bournemouth and Poole, quite a long way from me, Steve, but good to know that it's cold down there as well. So that's brilliant. Great, Ruth, thank you. Oh, we've got a really good spread of people, I think, from north to south this morning. So that's absolutely fantastic. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Oh, Hopwood, Karen, brilliant. I know that one well. I've done some work with your science staff over there. So that's wonderful. So hopefully the presentation's working okay for you. Just now then to say what we're up to today. So obviously we're on the welcome and introductions. In terms of what we're hoping to achieve in the next couple of hours, what we first of all want to do is just do a very quick overview of the T-level transition program. I appreciate that creative and media is a wave 4 route in terms of T-levels. So you won't be starting till September 2023. And therefore, the transition program, I'm guessing for a lot of you, is also going to be quite new. And I know we've sent out links to a lot of documents, and some of you may have well already had a briefing from one of my AOC advisor colleagues. But I think just to make sure we are all at the same place in terms of our understanding of the T-level transition program, I'm going to do a hopefully fairly quick overview of what that is, because what I really want to focus on this morning is the technical knowledge and skills component of that programme. And that bit is when we start to talk about these things called national technical outcomes. So I am going to explain sort of why we have them, how we ended up with them, and what you really need to do with those national technical outcomes in terms of your T-level transition programme. So as you've already all managed to do so, please do use the chat at any point during this morning. So I'm more than happy to take questions and or comments as we're going through this morning. I really want to make sure that you do get the most out of the couple of hours that we've got. So if what I'm saying is not making any sense, if what I'm saying is not what you thought the T-level transition programme was about, you know, if it's you've heard from somebody else who's running transition programme in a different area, so anything like that you do want to ask about, no silly questions at all this morning. So as I say, throw those into chat. I'm more than happy for you to talk to me as well. So if you do want to put your hands up and ask that, I'll try to keep an eye on the hands up as well. We will use some breakout rooms, so you get a little break from having to listen to me, but also most importantly, because that'll give you an opportunity to talk to each other. So we will put you into some smaller groups and you'll have a chance to talk to some colleagues from different organisations in terms of the transition programme, and particularly in terms of these things that I'm going to talk about, the national technical outcomes. I will try to answer as many questions as possible. If by any chance I can't answer particular questions, or also the fact that, as I've mentioned, we have run a number now of the technical focus groups, what we will have by the end of tomorrow is a whole set of frequently asked questions. And so they will all be available for you as well. And towards the end of this morning, I'll explain a little bit about how everything is available for in terms of support. Just a little caveat before we start. Obviously, what I can do today is talk about transition programme in relation, obviously, to the T-levels. They do go hand in hand, but we are focusing very much on the transition programme this morning. What I can't do is really debate either DFE policy or what the particular policy is with your organisation in terms of the introduction of the transition programme and the T-levels. You obviously know the situation in terms of where we're at with the T-levels, and yours in particular, your route for creative and media, and you also know that, you know, currently there's been a level 2 qualification review, and we're just waiting to find out some of the final bits and pieces from that review. So there is quite a lot of things that are new, and I do appreciate that that's a bit of a challenge, and transition program's another thing really to add into that. So I hope that's what you thought we were doing this morning. As I say, we are programmed to run over a couple of hours with those breakout sessions in between, but please do stop me and throw some comments in if there's bits and pieces that you need to further clarify from what I'm saying. Okay, let's make a start on the program itself, just to make sure everybody's at the same place. Okay. Oh, I've covered it really in terms of the session aims. We are going to talk about this thing called a revised framework. So the T-level transition programme was a phased approach, just as the T-levels have been a phased approach. And so we worked with some providers very early on, back in 2020 and 21, in terms of the introduction of the T-level transition programme. And we took a lot of feedback from those providers. And what that feedback then turned into is what we now have as the delivery framework for the T-level transition program. So there is a document called the delivery framework for the T-level transition program, and that is your guide to the requirements and the expectations in terms of the T-level transition programs across all of the routes. So if that's a document that you're not familiar with, we've got links in the presentation to it, but links will also have been sent out to you previously. So that framework is really what I'm going to talk about today in terms of how the T-level transition program works. And that framework, as I say, has been developed from those early providers who initially started on the T-level transition program. Then main focus, national technical outcomes, as I say, really explain why we have those, how we got to them, and what it is that we expect you to do with them. And then clearly to mention where we can go next in terms of supporting you in your planning for the T-level transition program. This short, sharp couple of hours is very much a technical focus group 1. We do have other focus groups planned throughout the year, as well as other support. So what is it then? It's really key, I think, to have in your mind the purpose of the T-level transition program, because everything then that falls out in terms of the principles, in terms of the design, in terms of the components that are part of that T-level transition program are all based around this purpose. And so it is there, the T-level transition program at a route level, okay? So that, again, just important that it is that high level, broad introduction, in this case, to the creative and media route. And so both of the T-levels that actually are in that route. So it's there for those students who, for one reason or another, were not able to go straight on to one of the T-levels within the creative and media route. And so it's very much a preparation year to make sure that those students who couldn't go straight into T-levels are really prepared well to move into a T-level and to be successful on that T-level. So whilst we appreciate, students don't always know and do change their minds in terms of a level 2 student, the whole rationale, the whole design principles around the T-level transition program is that focus of it being that stepping stone, that preparation year for those students whose sole intention is to go on to the T-level. Okay, so I'm sure you're all aware of that, but we always think it is really worth stressing that before we start, because obviously then what we see in terms of the T-level transition program, the things that are on it that we're going to talk about in a moment are all there to help prepare students for what they will then experience on the T-levels. And we mean that both in terms of content, in terms of assessment, in terms of components such as industry placement. So the program therefore has some core knowledge, skills and behaviours. And those core knowledge, skills and behaviours are not just related to the technical bit, okay? There's a whole lot more that students need to prepare for, because T-levels are something that are very different to what we might have on other level 3 programs currently. We do want to make sure that as part of the transition program, students are very clear about what the expectation is for them by the end of the program, for them to then be able to move on successfully to a T-level. Whilst the transition program does have what we call 6 components, the intention is that those components are not delivered in isolation, the T-level transition program is very much a program where the holistic and integrated approach is promoted. And I'll show you in a moment a little diagram that we use to try to emphasize that. But as I said before, we do appreciate that, you know, students sometimes are not always clear about where they want to go and what they want to do. So the transition program does also give that opportunity to make sure that students are making the right decisions in terms of their future career path and where they want to go next. So an awful lot, really, I suppose, that we are expecting of a T-level transition program, but feedback from providers has already shown how useful and how successful their T-level transition programs have been in then making sure that students are going to be successful onto the T-levels. So I hope that's all okay. As I say, if it's not, do throw something into the chat if there's something you want to ask about that. So those core knowledge, skills and behaviours, we talk about those in terms of 5 key areas. And when we say that it's that preparation year, and it is for those students who, for one reason or another, have not been able to go directly into a T-level, those reasons for why a student may not have been able to go directly onto a T-level will not just be around academic achievement in terms potentially of English and maths. There could be a whole host of other reasons why students are not quite ready yet to go on to a T-level. And so that's why we have these 5 core knowledge, skills and behaviour areas to really encompass all of those possible reasons why students are not quite ready to go on to a T-level. But what we are saying, though, is that the T-level transition programme does really have to be a programme that is going to be motivating and engaging, okay? And we do therefore want to see the development of these knowledge, skills and behaviours very much through practical application. We set out these 5 core areas and the knowledge and skills and behaviours that we expect within each, but as providers, the T-level transition programme does afford you quite a degree of flexibility in terms of how you choose to work with these 5 core knowledge and skill areas, and in terms of how you choose to deliver the whole T-level transition programme as a whole, and gives you the flexibility to individualize the programme, because there will be some students who need to work on a particular area in terms of their core knowledge, skills and behaviours more than they perhaps need to work on another area. So again, you've got that flexibility to do that. So in this little donut diagram, as we call it, if I just work round sort of from 12 o'clock-ish. So obviously English, maths and digital, we do know that there will be a number of students who will need to spend time, i.e. a transition programme amount of time, actually upskilling their English, maths and digital. And for some students, that may be that they do need to redo perhaps an English and maths GCSE or functional skills because they need to get a particular grade in order then to be successful when they move on to a T-level. I can see there's a couple of questions and Paul's helping me answer, so thanks very much, Paul, for that one. Yeah, T-levels post-16 only at this point. Thank you. In terms of skills for successful study, what we're thinking about here is particularly focusing on things like, I suppose, what's really going to help them when they're doing level 3 study. So that might be some skills around planning and monitoring and time management. It could also be that whole lot of study skills. Those of you who are familiar, obviously, with the requirements of T-level will know that some of the assessment methodologies on there may be something that will be a challenge for some students. So obviously revision techniques, exam strategies, report writing, they may all be things that we'd want to include within that study skills. Knowledge and skills for the workplace. Again, major component of the T-level program is obviously that industry placement. So what we want to make sure on the T-level transition program is that students are as prepared as they possibly can be for that industry placement. So about work readiness and how are we going to make sure that they do have particular skills and behaviours that are going to mean that they are then successful when they're on placement. Again, linked there really with the positive attitudes and behaviours, and it might be about attendance, it might be about confidence, it might be about developing some resilience. So that's what we'd include in that one. And so then the final one on there, and this is the one that we're going to talk about the most today, is this industry relevant technical knowledge and skills. So that's our technical component, and that's the one where we have these things called national technical outcomes. So what are you expected to deliver? So we want to see those 5 key areas for the knowledge, skills and behaviours woven into our 6 delivery components in a holistic programme. So this is DfE's expectation in terms of what a T-level transition programme looks like. Now, when some of you look at your existing level 2 programmes, you might well say, well, actually, we've got a lot of that already. Fantastic. Yeah. We're not saying, yeah, this is something completely new. We know that a lot of you got some fantastic practice already at level 2. But this is DfE's expectation for a T-level transition programme at that root level. So the 2 components, diagnostic monitoring guidance and the pastoral support, obviously those are things, and we represent them in the Venn diagram like that, because those we see as overarching components that will be running throughout, you know, the duration of a T-level transition programme. Then we've got our English, Maths and Digital, which I've already talked about. The experience of the workplace, so making sure the students are work ready, that they understand what's required of them, and therefore they're very well placed to go on their industry placement on T-level. That personal development enrichment, we'll get some of the study skills stuff in there. We might get some of the stuff around confidence and resilience. And then we've got our technical knowledge and skills. Now, again, you'll see a Venn diagram because of this holistic nature. So when you're delivering some technical knowledge and skills within the creative and media area, how are you doing that to then support what students are also needing to do, perhaps within their English or maths component? Whilst DfE sets these as a expectation, it's actually up to you as providers how you want to structure this whole T-level transition programme in terms of the weightings for those 6 components. And that will be relevant to you as providers, but also as individual students, and also in terms of perhaps how you're working with employers, the cohort of students that you've taken on in any given year. So you have the flexibility to decide how you do that within really your normal study programme hours of your 540. So it's quite different, I suppose, to a lot of study programs where you have a very fixed, this is what you must be doing, and this is how many hours you must be doing for this, that, or the other. So a great opportunity for you to do some fantastic curriculum development in terms of how you want to deliver the T-level transition program. Okay, let's just have a quick look at some of the comments. I know Paul's been really helping me to answer some of those. So we've talked about it, T-levels of post-16. Yeah, and Stuart, I can see you asked a question, and Hayley, about the entry requirements, and Paul has answered that for you. So the department will never set entry criteria for any program. T-levels, obviously the same. So individual providers can decide what their entry requirements will be, both in terms of academic attainment for GCSEs for those students coming straight from school. You may have other non-academic requirements that you want to set. You know, that is entirely up to you. The thing with the transition program, and obviously what a lot of providers have found, is that you basically have that year effectively of a transition program when you will really get to know those students and know what they do well with, and know where they need some further support. And so as part of the transition program, you can obviously be providing that support to make sure that they are then going to be able to progress onto and be successful on your T-level program. Okay, let me just whiz down a bit. Great that we've got some comments coming in. Okay. Can work placements include live briefs? Okay, so I'm not going to go into loads of detail this morning about that component that we term experience of the work place. We're very conscious in terms of level 2 students about whether direct involvement with employers and whether getting a work placement is going to be possible or not. If it is, fantastic, and we say in terms of good practice within the delivery framework that we would really like that to be a feature if we can. But we're also mindful that you will be, in terms of T-levels, also trying to source a lot of industry placements. So yes, absolutely fantastic if you can have that employer involvement and there can be some live briefs, so that we get students to have that experience of actually working with real people within the creative and media sector. And yet we do appreciate that within creative and media, the way things are organised are not necessarily in terms of big multi-million pound companies. Okay, a couple more that I'll just go through. If a student decides not to complete, oh, wait a minute, my chat's not working well. Okay, so at the end of a T-level transition program, students have achieved a T-level transition program in the route. Yeah, I'll come on in a moment to talk a little bit about qualifications, but unlike, I'll just say this for now, that'll set you off thinking, unlike other study programs, there is no requirement to include a funded qualification should you choose not to want one in there. But I will come back to that as we go through the little bit about the NTOs. Certainly any involvement, Stuart, that you can get with HE, and if we can get them to be some of our employers, that would be fantastic. Yeah. I can see there's another one. Yeah, I can see Lauren's answered that one about the qualification for me as well. Thank you. Okay, great questions. Do keep them coming. Both myself and my colleagues will attempt to answer some of those. Okay, so in terms of, let me just quickly do that one for you, Stuart. I can't do a whole thing on T-levels today, but I'll just very quickly say, if we're talking T-levels and industry placement, then we should be focusing on the occupational specialism. If we're talking transition program and experience of the workplace, because transition program is at the root level, then they could be wider than just the occupational specialisms that you might be offering on the T level. So hopefully that answered that one, I think. Okay, so I'm going to focus now then on this bit, this technical knowledge and skills bit. So this is the bit that I'm guessing most of you on the call today are going to be taking responsibility for, but obviously in conjunction with all of the others who may be leading on those other components, because we do really want to see that integrated and holistic approach. So a couple of things really to say about the national technical outcomes that are the content for the technical knowledge and skills component. So the overall aim for this component, so obviously we have a purpose for the whole program. This particular component of the T-level transition program is there to give that very broad and high level introduction to the creative and media route. Okay. We could have had a T-level transition program that didn't have any technical knowledge and skills in it. We could have said to students, okay, you didn't quite get what you needed to meet our entry requirements for the T level. So come and do a year with us, and we'll do some English and maths, and we'll do some stuff around study skills, etc. And then once you've done that, that'll be great. You can move in straight onto our T level. I guess if we did that, we probably wouldn't have students staying with us for very long. These students were wanting to go onto a T level. That's their intention, to go onto the T level, one of those two within the creative and media route. And so actually to run a program that didn't have any technical knowledge and skills related to creative and media just would not be engaging and motivating for them. So the technical knowledge and skills component is very much there, I suppose, as a hook to keep the students motivated and engaged. It's not expected to be the largest part of a T-level transition program. We give some guidance, okay, and that's purely what it is. We give some guidance that of the whole study program, DFE's expectation would be around the 120 to 150 guided learning hours for this technical component. And so what do you actually have to deliver then in terms of that 120, 150 guided learning hours? What you have to deliver are the national technical outcomes. When we started the transition program, we didn't have any content within the technical knowledge and skills component. We said to providers, you can do whatever you want. And some providers, great, yeah, off they went. They were happy with that. Others struggled a bit. And when we got all those providers together, what they said was, well, actually, for consistency, so that we have some quality, really, some assurance that when students have finished a T-level transition program in creative and media, we know that they have all covered X, Y, and Z. What we actually want is we want you to develop some content. And so that's what we did. We developed these things called national technical outcomes. We didn't just sit in a room and think, yeah, that'd be nice. Let's do that. Let's do the other. Obviously, we got those providers involved. We got a lot of employers involved. We looked at what's in the core for the 2 T levels in this route, and we looked at what's in existing level 2 qualifications. And so that was what we based the national technical outcomes, this bit of content, on. And so the national technical outcomes, the content that we give you, is there as a minimum expectation. This is what you must cover with students who are on a T-level transition programme in creative and media. But it doesn't mean that that's all you need to do. Should you want to do more, okay, and again, you might want to think about this in terms of your cohort of students, in terms of your work with employers, etc. We do also provide some examples, and that's literally all they are. We provide some illustrative examples of further breadth in terms of more you might do, and further depth in terms of what you might do, a stretch and challenge. But they are very much there as illustrative examples. You will be able to come up with much better ideas in terms of if you want to add some breadth or some depth to the national technical outcomes. So what do they look like? Let's get on to that bit, because that's much more interesting. Sorry, we just jumped a slide a bit. Okay, go back. So the national technical outcomes within all of the routes, but obviously today we're going to focus very much on the creative and media national technical outcomes. So within creative and media T-level transition programme, we have, for the national technical outcomes, we have 3 performance outcomes. So we have 3 can-do statements. And obviously underpinning those can-do statements, we have some technical knowledge. We have both technical and employability skills, and also some behaviours. The in brackets bit there, the and learning outcomes, in some routes, not creative and media, but in some routes, just to be aware in case you talk to colleagues, the national technical outcomes do include a learning outcome, okay? But for creative and media, you've got 3 performance outcomes, and they were written as performance outcomes to link, obviously, to the way we write T-level occupational specialism, if you're familiar with how that works. So it gives a nod really to that. So they are can-do things students must be able to, by the end of their T-level programme, X, Y, and Z. Within the national technical outcomes, and again, this links to this whole notion of holistic and integrated delivery. So we do also reference English Maths level 2 content through our communication and numeracy skills. So again, that's a nod to how something that you might be doing within one of the performance outcomes will help to support a particular aspect of GCSE Maths, functional skills English. So it is about some mapping, I suppose, some opportunities of how you might then be able to integrate with the English Maths and digital components, because as well in there we've got some digital skills. Obviously a lot of the content itself, because of the nature of creative media, does have a lot of digital stuff in there anyway. So there is a set of national technical outcomes for T-level transition programme at route level across the 11 routes that we currently have, and any new ones that will appear. So for creative and media, this is the 3 performance outcomes that we have. And so if you haven't seen these before, again, this is all in another guidance document, our national technical outcomes guidance documents for each of the routes. So again, we'll put the links, etc. if you haven't had a chance to look at them already, so that after today you can obviously go and have a look at these in a bit more detail. So our minimum expectation is for students who are on a T-level transition program in creative and media, is that by the end of the program, they can propose solutions, respond to a brief, and they can apply technical skills. Now, hopefully, when you look at those three, they don't look like unrealistic things to ask a level 2 student to do. They might look very much like what you would see in existing level 2 qualifications. When you look at those, hopefully you can see, if you're aware of what's in the outline content for T-levels, you can see where they link there with the core content, and also a nod towards occupational specialisms within the 2 T-levels within the creative and media route. So underpinning each of those outcomes, there are some knowledge, skills and behaviours. But I've talked at you a lot, and I do want you to have an opportunity to stop having to listen to me, but also be able to talk to each other. So what I want us to do next is really to start focusing on these outcomes and what they really mean to you, as you will have the responsibility for delivering these and making sure that students can, by the end of a T-level transition program, propose, respond and apply. So how you choose to deliver these outcomes, as I say, is very much up to you. DFE do not say how you must deliver them, but what DFE do say is that you will need to be able to demonstrate how you have ensured that students can propose, respond, apply. Okay? So that's what we ask you to do. So if you haven't got those in front of you, because you haven't had a chance to look at the National Technical Outcome document, if you can just quickly scribble those onto a piece of paper in front of you. So it's proposed solutions to meet creative and design business opportunities, responding by pitching and applying technical skills to produce. If you can just quickly jot those down, because when you move into your breakout groups, what I'm actually going to, thank you, that's brilliant, put them in chat for me. What I'm going to ask you to do when we move into breakout groups is I'm going to ask you to focus really on a particular outcome and really have a think about what would you need to ask students to be able to do so that you could demonstrate that that outcome has been met. So throughout the program, if we think about, I don't know, let's do outcome one, let's do proposed solutions. So we couldn't just straight away ask students to, you know, propose solutions. We're going to have to do some teaching and learning so that perhaps they understand how legislation would affect the solution that they are actually proposing. So would you do some work around legislation, and then would you give them a particular solution and say, would this work in terms of how legislation would affect it? You would need to perhaps give some students some input in terms of how to do project management and what proposals have got to factor in terms of budget and resources. So maybe what you'll need to do before they can do their final proposed solution is perhaps you'd need them to do an activity around some project planning. So it's just really having to think about what would you need to be able to ask students to do in terms of steps throughout the the T-level transition program to make sure that by the end of it, they could demonstrate each of those outcomes. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do in your breakout rooms. The breakout rooms will come up in a moment. We're just going to do the 2 rooms, I think, today, looking at how many of you we've got, so you've got a decent number to be able to talk to each other. So if you're in room 1, then if you could have a think about outcome 1, that's easiest. If you're in room 2, have a think about outcome 2. I will give you around 20 minutes in a breakout room. One of our advisors will be there with you, but they're very much there to sort of facilitate and prompt. They're not there to give you all the answers, and they will also be taking a couple of notes, etc. So those of you in room 1 looking at outcome 1, and those of you in room 2 looking at outcome 2, if in your discussions you can have a real think about what you'll be asking students to do, and also then just be prepared to give some quick feedback to the other rooms when we come back. So if somebody can also just be brave enough to volunteer to cover some of the key points that you've been talking about. I'll keep a check on the messages as well, because I can see there's a few more in there, and I'll respond to those as we're ongoing. So I'll let you now into your breakout rooms. Abby will put that up for you, and that's what we'll be asking you to do. So if you want to join those now, that'd be brilliant. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome back from your breakout groups. Hope you've had a useful opportunity to talk to each other in terms of the programme, and in particularly how you might be delivering the outcome, and what you'll be asking students to do in order to demonstrate that they can actually achieve that outcome. So just some quick feedback from each room so that we can share obviously across the 2 different groups. So if I just go logically, and in terms of room 1, I think there's a few of you now left there. So I think Blake and Hayley and Karen, you were in room 1. Is one of you able to just quickly give me some feedback in terms of your discussions?
So we talked about some business case studies. So potentially looking at a national company and then maybe a local company that students could be in contact with, so they get more of an inside look of a small local company, as well as seeing a larger company. So for example, it could be the BBC would be the big national one they look at. Yeah. And for a local company, they might look at a local video production company or local graphic designers, because we're going to do the content creation production strand. So they could look at those smaller companies as well.
Okay. And that's great, Mike. And obviously there's no issues in you tailoring, yeah, towards obviously the particular T-level that you are intending students to progress onto, yeah. The only thing I'd say is we will just always need to be mindful that the T-level transition program is at that root level as well, yeah. So it's just sometimes having that in mind. But I mean, as far as I can see, that the whole case study approach and getting students to perhaps interrogate some case studies to see you know, what requirements etc would be from different clients, both a large and a small client, would work whether you were going media or whether you were going craft type routes, presumably. Would you think, right?
Yeah,
it just we had a conversation about you could be quite limited in the employers that you work with, depending where you are in the UK, for what pathway you're going on. For media, it could be more straightforward in some areas closer to city, but particularly with craft and with the craft and design pathway, looking at textiles, jewellery and furniture, that could be more limited. So you may need to look at a more national company for that.
Yeah, and that might work better for that one.
Yeah.
which T levels are you going to be offering, Karen?
We'll be looking at the media and broadcast production. The craft and design is more limited where we are in Rochdale. We don't have major furniture manufacturers, and we just need to make sure if we go down that road that we do have the employers lined up.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Yeah. No, that's really interesting and great that you've been able to focus on the outcome. So thank you very much for that, and hopefully you did have some useful discussions there. That there was a question in the chat which some of you may have caught just before you went into your breakout rooms, and that was a question about whether you have to deliver a T-level transition program, and obviously the answer to that is no, you don't. Yeah, there is no requirement that in order to deliver the T levels in this route that you have to have a T-level transition program. Obviously, what a lot of providers have found is that having that T-level transition program has been a really fantastic way of getting students who, for one reason or another, weren't quite ready for a T-level, then prepared and be able to be successful on the T-level. They have found that having the transition program has been a great thing to do. But just so that you're all aware that there's not a requirement to do it. So that's just another bit to put into your list of things. So room 2, I think our Paul and Paul Harris, as well as Ruth and Sarah were in there. Again, what were you guys talking about in terms of that outcome and some of your approaches? Does somebody want to give me some feedback from room 2?
Second outcome to do with responding to a brief and how we might go about doing that. So we spoke about what would we be looking for a student to be able to show that they could respond to a brief. So looking at things like audience, the genre, the purpose, the conventions of the thing that they're going to need to produce at the end of it. And we were kind of talking that currently some of the colleges, some of the schools are doing UAL, some are doing BTEC, and if there's things within those subjects already that could be used, and then filling in any gaps that the students would need for the transition program, so that they potentially still get a qualification through us, as well as the skills that they would need to move forward on to doing a T-level, but equally for employment and for if they did want to then go to university, where kind of is the progression routes that they could take.
Yeah.
And then we were talking about how it'd be a good idea to work back from the T level, so that we know what they need to do to be able to do that, and then how we could then cater for that within the level 2 provision. And then again, looking at what skills and behaviour and what aptitude they would need when setting the criteria for the course. So a bit like we was talking about in the chat, like what would we set for maths and English to be able to do the course. And that was it.
No, that sounds really great. I'm sorry, it sounds like you discussed an awful lot in the space of 20 minutes. So well done.
One interesting thing was about whether there might be some issues with like provider capacity for developing wider skills in context. So when we're talking about understanding genre and audience, and that's obviously transferable to kind of in communication skills more widely. But there was we had a discussion around that sort of capacity, workforce capacity, doing that in context.
Yeah, and that's that whole thing then, and Paul, about obviously working closely with colleagues within English and Maths and departments as well, isn't it? So that you can get that effective contextualization that's going to work within the technical component, but that's also going to support English and Maths as well. So I think that's a really important point. You mentioned quite a few things, Sarah, that I'll just sort of pick up on. So obviously this whole notion around qualification. So I did say I'd come back to it, and so I will. So what you've obviously all worked out is that should you choose to just take these outcomes and the knowledge and skills that underpin them, and develop your own schemes of learning and formative assessment opportunities and then summative assessment opportunities, then you can do that. Okay, that's what you can do. There is no requirement for there to be a qualification, but if you feel that you do wish to include a technical qualification, that is still something that you can do. You do need to be mindful of the number of hours, okay, and the fact that we do say the technical component shouldn't be the largest component of a T-level transition program. And what you do also need to be clear about, and you mentioned it, Sarah, and obviously you discussed it in your group, is that a qualification may or may not, cover the outcomes and indeed the knowledge, skills and behaviours that underpin them. So you will have to look, if you're going with a qualification, to make sure that you are still adequately covering the outcomes, because that's the minimum expectation from the department. Some providers have, I suppose, gone down a route which is a bit mix and matchy. So some providers are not using a technical qualification. Actually, what they're doing is using a qualification like a project qualification. And so they can still mould that qualification to meet the requirements of the national technical outcomes, but students obviously do still get a qualification, as well as the fact that students, as part of their overall transition programme, may well be getting their English and maths GCSEs as well. Other providers have also used the framework of a qualification. Perhaps they've used some units from a qualification, again, to help them to deliver and demonstrate student achievement of the outcomes, but they haven't necessarily done the qualification as a whole, and they haven't necessarily registered students for that qualification, which has then meant they haven't had to jump through the assessment hoops that are required of that qualification, and they've been able to develop their own assessments, which much more mirror the assessments that students are going to encounter on the T level. Okay, we do have an expectation that as part of the technical component and the delivery of the national technical outcomes, that there is a small route-based project as part of how you deliver the outcomes. And so obviously that is there to give that bit of a link with the employer set project that's on the T levels. Okay, so yeah, and I agree, Blake, yeah. In terms of, for some students, for some parents, it can be quite difficult to say, well, this is the programme, what will they have at the end of it? Yes, they will have their GCE Maths and English. That might be something that they don't already have. But yeah, you may still want to look at a qualification in terms of the transition programme. So for the transition programme, you've got what you're going to get, yeah, in terms of content. So if I just show you, because I don't know whether you've had chance to look at the National Technical Outcomes document or not yet. So you looked at the outcome just as an outcome, and you already identified some of the knowledge and skills that would be required if you were going to be able to demonstrate that students had achieved that outcome. So we have given you that, in as much as under each outcome you get the knowledge, skills and behaviours. So I've just taken the headings. So in the case of the knowledge, I've taken the technical knowledge headings that appear in our outcome document. Under each of those headings within the document, there is a bit more detail of what our expectation is. So, for example, under creative economy, we'd be looking at different ways of working in the creative sector, different sources of finance, the fact that, you know, it is important to understand about profit and loss, and the bit about legislation. So you do get a bit more detail under each of those headings. Similarly, if we were talking about the skill of being able to plan, we'd provide a little bit more detail that, you know, we'd expect students to know how to identify steps and how to estimate time and resources, how to sequence and prioritize. We'd expect them to be able to use some project management tools. So we do give you a bit more detail under each of our headings, whether they're topic headings in knowledge, or whether they're a particular skill area. And for the transition program, that's it, if you like. That's as much as we are going to give you. Obviously, T levels, and that's a bit different. So in terms of T levels, you have what exists currently, which the awarding organisations are using, which is the outline content. And obviously at the moment, you're waiting for the full specification from the awarding organisation. Okay, but for transition, for each of the outcomes, you will have this knowledge, skills and behaviours bit, and you will also, in terms of each outcome, you will also have a bit more of a rationale in terms of what that outcome's about. I've mentioned that we have a route-based project, and so it is also possible that you can think very much about whether you would be delivering these outcomes in isolation, or whether you would be looking to combine the outcomes, because from the three that you can see here for creative and media, I think you can probably see that there's a bit of a natural progression in terms of you know, pitching and then obviously producing, so that outcome 3 in terms of where they've got to apply their technical skills. So you may want to think about how you would be combining some of the outcomes and how you would demonstrate that in a combined formative assessment way. So that's just another little thing for you to have a think about. It'd be really interesting to get a few more of your thoughts around the whole teaching and learning, and what you think your approaches and strategies are going to be, looking now at the fact that you've got the knowledge and skills that underpin each outcome. I won't send you away into groups again. Perhaps I can just carefully select a few to give me a few thoughts around your teaching and learning approaches. So Blake, as you've mentioned about your BTEC creative and media, in terms of the teaching and learning for this transition program, have you got any thoughts around your teaching and learning approaches? Is it going to be very different to what you're already doing now, or can you see that this is going to fit in pretty well?
Yeah, I do think it would fit in well. I think what we really need to do is speak to employers to see what they want, because that's something we need to do with the T level anyway. So it might be a good idea with the transitional, because historically here, media, we've taught it very distantly from employers.
Okay.
So we don't do lots of media work experience. It is very much, we use briefs that BTEC give us. So now also with T levels, we need to be speaking more to employers.
Yeah.
And it would be nice to speak to more employers and go visit them and find out what do they want us to do. And because I've not been in a media company for a very long time, so I'm very much, I need to see what the real world's like again, because it has been a long time. So as a T level, hopefully will help me see what the real media landscape is like today. So that's something I'm quite interested in. So, but the BTEC course we do for level 2, we do the larger one. We could easily do the small certificate. I do think it would fit quite nicely into a lot of this. But again, I'd like to speak to employers, and that might completely alter everything. They might come back and say BTEC courses are no good. They're just not like the real world, in which case we'd tailor it more to what they would say, especially if they want our students to go and be with them for 9 weeks, 4.5 weeks. So
yeah, on the placement for T-level. Yeah. And I mean, I think really now it is worth a look, as you say, at your current level 2 BTEC, if that's a certificate or whatever, and look at these national technical outcomes, yeah, and have a real think about your teaching and learning approaches, what you do on BTEC, and is that going to fit, or actually having these outcomes and some flexibility, have you now got an opportunity to perhaps do something a bit different than what you're currently fixed on in terms of the BTEC? Because obviously you have constraints with qualifications that you don't necessarily have to go with if you decide to go with a non-qualification approach. So I suppose but it's quite a big thing. I appreciate that, to not have a qualification. So it's certainly something to have a think about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not spoiled about the qualification, but I know other areas in the college have really raised serious concerns about it. So I'd be quite happy not to have a qualification attached.
Yeah.
There was some mention of having a college certificate at the end.
Yeah,
so
you get that certificate. Yeah. So
yeah.
And I mean, the other thing is that, I've mentioned obviously the project one, but also what a lot of providers have done is looked at some of the smaller qualifications that actually employers are much more interested in. And actually they've included those within their transition program, rather than gone with one of the very traditional, BTEC or City and Guilds type 180-hour qualifications. So that's another thing that, you have got that flexibility to do that as well, which will really then help students as they go on to a T-level. If they can say to employers, well, I've already done X, Y, and Z, can I have my industry placement? They may be in a much better position to give them a placement opportunity.
I think, Blake, you raise a very important point about currency, and this is what transition can do. So any qualification that you're offering, more than likely it started its development 2 or 3 years ago, probably longer.
Yeah.
So in a fast moving technological industry like media, you may not be getting the latest techniques. By going back out into industry, finding out what's happening, you can then bring back the most current practices and include those in your program.
Yeah, that's what we need to do. We are definitely a little bit behind in terms of what's going on right now. So
yeah, no, brilliant. Thanks about that. That's really great. Ruth, I know you were in the other room. Have you got any thoughts in terms of your teaching and learning approaches to this? Is it looking quite similar to what you might do on existing level 2, or are you thinking you might be doing something quite different now, looking at the knowledge and skills, etc., that underpin these outcomes?
No, for the most part, it fits in quite well. Like others were with UAL, so it's all this plan, create, make decisions is in there, but it is that industry experience and input that I do worry a little bit. We're quite a small area. There aren't a lot of industries nearby, so it's how we feed that in. So it's looking for contacts as well and things like that, and that element. So I would agree. Yeah,
and so you're thinking that you'll be continuing with a UAL qualification as part of your transition program, Ruth, or will be looking to go on a non-qualification scary approach?
Yeah, I think potentially keep with UAL and do it as a combined thing for now and see how it goes. Because I also think it would be better to start the T levels and then you can look more again at the transition period, can't you? So once you've done that bit, it's sort of a going back and forth and seeing how.
Yeah, and as I say, obviously we looked at the content, yeah, and the assessment requirements, etc., of the T level. but obviously that's not necessarily the same as delivering it on the ground. And so, like you say, when you start delivering it on the ground, then you might think, oh, students are really struggling with X, Y, and Z. Actually, what I need to do as part of my transition program is make sure I do a whole section on report writing, because they just literally, or they can't reference, or they can't, So it might then start, as you say, to influence your decision of what you put in your transition program. Are you intending to start both at the same time, Ruth, or are you going to do your transition program a year later?
Well, I have to say I'm not entirely sure yet, because we've not got to those conversations yet in our curriculum planning, if you like. So I've come for information and to see. So nothing's sort of set in stone. And
I mean, for a lot of providers, the decision really can only be made when you sometimes see your cohort of students, and actually whether students who did want to go on to T-level for one reason or another can't, and therefore you do therefore need to run a transition program. But then it's also about viability in terms of numbers to be able to run the transition program as well, and how that links in with your other level 2 offers. So, you know, we appreciate that within the next few months, there is really an awful lot to think about in terms of your transition program, as well as your T levels. So I'll just give you a bit of an idea then about what else we've got available, so that can, I'll just whiz past that. I did mention this one right at the beginning, but this does link into what a few of you have just been saying in terms of your approaches. So just as a reminder, the outcomes, the national technical outcomes, those 3 outcomes that we've focused on today, are that minimum expectation. We give you some illustrative examples, but as we've just been discussing, it may well be that you then find that there are bits of breadth and or depth that you do want to add to your transition program, so that students are able to be successful on the T level. To give you an example from other T levels, which applies obviously to creative and media as well, when you look at the core, clearly in terms of the exams, yes, there is some marks for students being able to recall, but the vast majority of marks within the T level examinations are for the assessment objectives 2 and 3. And assessment objective 2, if you haven't had a chance to look, is around being able to apply knowledge, and 3 is very much about being able to be given some information and be able to analyze and evaluate it. So what a lot of T-level providers have found is that what they want to include within that transition program is around that application and that analysis and evaluation, because they're not things that students have been very familiar with. So in terms of adding depth to your transition program, and therefore making sure that you have got that effective bridge between the transition program and your T level, you might want to think about how you can get those incorporated into it. So that's just a thought, linking very much from what Ruth was saying about seeing what happens on your T level. So today has been a first step, if you like, in terms of what we offer for support for our technical focus groups. After Christmas, because I know you'll all be waiting to run off for our Christmas break, so we count this as technical focus group 1. So in January, February, so end of January, end of February, we already have planned our technical focus groups 2. What we're going to look at with those is we are going to be focusing on the national technical outcomes in a bit more detail, how you're going to be delivering them, thinking a bit about the project, etc. And we're going to run those as face-to-face events. And the way we'll able to do that is that if we run them regionally, then we can invite people from across all routes. That means that you will get an opportunity to hear from people other than creative and media, but it means that we will still have the opportunity to put you into route specific groups for activities, etc. So that's how we're going to run and manage those. So you can see we've got 3 dates in the 3 regions. The 31st of January one for Central, we have actually had that confirmed now, and we will be in Loughborough. And similarly, for those of you who are down south, the Wednesday the 8th one, that is now confirmed that will be Petrock. So more than happy for you to quickly scribble those dates down, if there are some there that will be of use to you. It will all come out in information right at the start of next term for you as well, so that you're very clear about what's on offer when. We will also, in June, we will run our 3rd session for you. And at that session, because by then you'll be well into your planning, you'll be really familiar with the outcomes and what the requirements are and how you're going to be delivering them. We'll be thinking then very much about that holistic delivery and how the whole programme is going to work together. As well as the events, you've met a couple of our advisors today. You do have an advisor attached to your organisation. So if you don't know who that is, it's worth finding that out. And we do also have a Padlet, and again, we will send you the link for the Padlet. So obviously things like today's presentation, we'll put up there. As I mentioned very early on, we'll put some frequently asked questions up there. We also have a whole set of guidance resources. Now, they're not creative and media specific, but they are guidance resources about transition programme, and certainly things that you will be able to apply to the creative and media route. So that's all on the Padlet as well. So lots of really useful information on there. So that really just leaves me with a couple of things. First of all, Abby's just put up our little survey, and I know you can do 2 things at once, so that's okay. Abby's put up our survey, and there are 5 questions on our feedback survey. So if you can just make sure that when you're answering them, you do scroll right the way down to the 5th question. So if you can just give us a thought really on today's 2-hour session, and whether that's been of use to you. And obviously, if there's any particular comments in terms of things that you would have liked that we haven't been able to give you in this short session, then please do let us know in the chat. And whilst you're doing that, I'm just going to say to you, now that you've really had an introduction to the transition programme and to the national technical outcomes, you might want to start to think about who you need to speak to. I know a couple of you already mentioned about possibly talking to others within your organisation who are delivering transition programmes, or perhaps talking to one of your curriculum leads about how the transition programme and the T-level are going to work together. I've mentioned a number of documents today. I've talked about delivery framework. I've talked about the national technical outcomes. I've talked about route-based projects. So there are guidance documents related to all of those that if you haven't seen, you might want to go and have a look at. And that will obviously then determine what your first action is going to be after this event. Thank you very much, everyone. Some great input today, some really great questions that came out. Nothing else from me in terms of input, but if you have got further questions that you haven't had answered, I'm more than happy to answer those on an individual basis. So please do just stay and ask me those. Otherwise, thank you very much for your attendance. Enjoy the rest of your sunny Thursday, and best wishes for the holidays. Thanks very much, everybody. See you later. Bye.